President, please be seated. The court is back in session, and the floor is given to the Deputy Court Prosecutor to resume his questioning.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. Witness, before the break, you mentioned that after Hui Srai was arrested, his wife and children were arrested as well. Do you happen to know how old his children were?
I do not recall how old they were. They were quite young. While I was working the field at the time while he was being arrested.
Do you know the name of either his wife or his children?
I do not remember his wife's name. Perhaps her names may have been Kun. And there was the younger sibling of Hui named Huan also, who was arrested, and I cannot recall the names of Hui's children.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to turn to a discussion of Chiang Ik in a moment, but first I want to ask you, focusing now on the period after Chiang Ik was set up, did killings continue at the Tuol Sleng compound, at the S-21 compound in Tuol Sleng? So even after prisoners were being transported to Chiang Ik for execution, did some people continue to be killed there at Tuol Sleng?
I did not remember it well. Cadres from S-21 were also sent to Chiang Ik, and S-21 guards were also sent there.
I want to ask you about something from one of your statements. This is E3 5155, English 0016 1592, Khmer 0014 6640, and French 0014 8085. And you were asked, aside from Chiang Ik and S-21, were there other locations? And your answer was, quote, "There were only these two sites. Even when Chiang Ik existed, there were still killings at S-21 when the number was small and they were major people." So does that refresh your memory? Are you aware that killings continued at S-21 for small groups of people or for important people, even after Chiang Ik had been established?
Yes, it still happened at Tuol Sleng. Staff members of that location, some of them were not sent to Chiang Ik. They were killed right within the compound of S-21.
So you've mentioned staff members of S-21 being killed at the S-21 compound. Are there any other groups of people who continued to be killed there even after Chiang Ik was established?
They were sent to Chiang Ik. In fact, only senior or high-ranking cadres were killed at Chiang Ik, rather at S-21.
Okay, I wanna turn to Chiang Ai now and talk about the establishment of that operation. And my first question is, do you know the reason? Did anyone ever tell you the reason that Chiang Ai was set up, that killings were moved from S21 to Chiang Ai?
The whole, taដូចtalk to the whole at the whole's house. The discussion was that the killing would be stopped at Tul Slang, and they said that the prisoners would be sent to Chiang Ai for execution, and the proper location would be located for that execution.
And do you remember, or did you learn the reason for that decision? In other words, why did they want to move the killing location from Tul Slang to Chiang Ai?
They said there were no more killings at Tuls Line because the information of killings may have been leaked to the international, so killings locations would be found at Chiang Ai.
I want to ask you about something that Doik said about the reason Chiang Ai was set up, and see if that maybe refreshes your memory. This is E3/5766, and this is the witness confrontation that you participated in, along with several other people 2 days after your site visit to Chiang Ai. And the ERNs are English 0016 5437, Khmer 0016 5428, and French 0016 5445. And there's a discussion of transferring executions to Chiang Ai. And one of the things that Doik says is, quote, "As I have already explained, there was a risk of epidemics around S21 because of the far too great number of corpses," unquote. So did you ever hear that as a rationale, either from Doik or from Taho or anyone else? The reason the execution site needed to be moved was that there was a risk of epidemics at Tul Slang because of the number of corpses.
I heard they say that there was bad smelling at Tuls Lang, so the killing site would be moved from Tuls Lang to Chiang Ai.
Okay, and before we get to the mechanics of the Chiang Ai operation, I know this may be a difficult question, but do you have any way of estimating the total number of people who were killed at both at the S21 compound in Tul Slang and at Chiang Ai combined?
I did not hold those documents. 10,000 of them, I may say.
And why do you say tens of thousands of people were killed at those two locations?
From the evidence and from the calculation of the total number, there were more than 20,000 present in traps. The co-prosecutor wants to know about your experience, your knowledge in relation to what you did during the decade, and that documents were compiled or drawn up by the Documentation Center of Cambodia. The co-prosecutor wants only your direct knowledge, observation, and experience, and also what you did during that decade. The co-prosecutor wants to know about the experience and knowledge at S21. So through your assumption, through your recollection and observation, how many prisoners at that location? Why you said that there were 20,000?
បាទខ្ញុំសូមជំរាបថា
Witness. Together at Chiang Mai and Tuas Line, there were a lot of graves. I know that there were many prisoners killed, but you can ask a further question to Susti about the total number of the killed prisoners.
Okay. So I want to move now to the mechanics of the operations at Chiang Mai. And to start off with, can you tell us how you would learn that it was time for you to take a group of prisoners to Chiang Mai? Who would tell you that, or how would you be informed?
Let me tell you, the whole issued an order to me and to my men to prepare the vehicle to bring prisoners to Chiang Mai. So I got the vehicles ready to load the prisoners from Tuas Line to Chiang Mai.
And how long in advance of taking a group of prisoners would Taho inform you that you needed to do this? Would he tell you just hours before? Would he give you 1 or 2 days notice? How long in advance would you find out that you were going to need to do this?
For instance, he would tell me at around 4 p.m. that a specific number of prisoners would be taken from Tuas Line to Chiang Mai, and he would also tell me of how many vehicles needed to use to send those prisoners to Chiang Mai.
And when he would tell you that, would you communicate that information to Comrade Teng and the people who were permanently stationed at Chiang Mai?
I did not know about that. Taho usually was on his motorbike, and perhaps he told his messenger to go and tell things.
I want to ask you about something that witness Toi Tang said in this court on the 21st of April, and this is just after 3:18 p.m. from the transcript of that day. He was talking about his task of digging pits at Chiang Mai, and he said, quote, before they brought prisoners, Hui actually had told us 2 days in advance to prepare those pits, that on this particular day, prisoners would be brought in, and for that reason, our group had to be ready with those pits, unquote. So does that refresh your memory? Do you recall communicating with Comrade Tang in advance to tell him that a group of prisoners was going to be coming and that pits needed to be dug for them?
There was one time Taho asked me to go on a motorbike to tell Teng to dig the graves, and to tell Teng that prisoners would be sent to Chiang Mai on a specific day, and 2 graves were needed to be dug. and I told them that no staff member could go anywhere else besides waiting at the place to be ready for the prisoners at Chiang Ai.
And when you say that 2 graves needed to be dug, how many prisoners would fit into each of these graves? So how many bodies would fit into each of those 2 graves?
The 2 graves would fit 100 bodies.
And is that 100 bodies combined in 2 graves, or is that 100 bodies in each grave?
One grave could fit 50 up to 100 bodies. Sometimes one grave would be needed for 50 or 60 bodies.
And you mentioned you informing Comrade Tang about about digging the grave pits on this occasion. Do you know if he was informed in advance on other occasions? And if so, how, or do you not know that?
When Taho asked me to go and tell Teng, I would do so. And usually the graves would be ready, and I did not know how long they had dug the graves before the prisoners were sent to their location.
Are you able to estimate the average size of a group of prisoners that you would transport to Chiang Ai?
From 50 prisoners up to hundreds of them.
And just to make sure I understood you correctly, did you say 50 prisoners up to 100, or did you say 50 prisoners up to hundreds? In other words, multiple hundreds.
One trip, a vehicle could accommodate 30 up to 40 prisoners, and sometimes we had to go 2 times with the prisoners on the 2 vehicles.
Okay. Can you tell us, were there ever groups that were significantly larger than that? Do you remember groups that were much larger than the average size group ever being taken to Chiang Ai? In other words, multiple hundreds.
I do not know about that. Not only I go. Peng Ho also went, so I do not know for sure.
And roughly, how often would you take a group of prisoners to Chiang Ai? Would it happen daily, weekly, monthly? What was the frequency?
I cannot tell you. Sometimes I was required to go, and on another occasion Paul was required, and sometimes Peng, I cannot recall it well.
Okay, so if I've understood you correctly, you said that sometimes you would go, sometimes Peng would go, sometimes Paul would go. Is that correct?
បាទខ្ញុំ
That is correct. Peng, Paul, and I would take turn and went to that location. So it depended on the instruction of Paul, on the order whom, which person would go.
And maybe you don't know this, but if you do know, was it roughly equally divided? In other words, would you go a third of the time, Peng would go a third of the time, Paul would go a third of the time? Or was there one of you who went more than the others went?
It did not depend on us to divide the workload. It depended on Hall, who was the one who issued the workload. And I cannot recall how many trips I went to the location and how many trips Paul did the job. So it depended on Hall. My task was to receive prisoners on specific locations, usually.
When you were taking prisoners to Chiang Ai, approximately what time of day would you usually travel there?
It was a quiet period of time. Perhaps it happened at around 8 p.m. or maybe between that 8 or a bit later after that time.
And were the prisoners blindfolded and handcuffed when you took them to Chiang Ai?
Before prisoners were sent to that location, those prisoners were blindfolded and their hands bound behind their backs. And when the prisoners were on the vehicles, they were also shackled and handcuffed.
Did anyone tell the prisoners where they were being taken?
The regulation was not to tell the prisoners to be killed. Staff members were required to tell the prisoners that they needed to go and live in a new house.
How many guards would you bring along with you when you took a group of prisoners to Chiang Ai?
បាទអ្នក
Two guards on a vehicle protecting the prisoners at the back, and one driver and another guard inside the cabin.
I want to ask you now about lists of prisoners. Did you receive a list of prisoners from anyone when you were taking a group to Chiang Ai?
I did not receive the list of prisoners from any other person, but I was given a pen and perhaps a piece of paper to register the numbers of the prisoner I received, and then I would present that piece of notes to Susti to verify the numbers of prisoners sent to Chiang Ai.
So, at what points in the process would you count the number of prisoners under your control? Would you count them before you left Tuol Sleng? Would you count them on arrival at Chiang Ai, or both? Or when would you count them?
បាទពេល
After prisoners, in fact, Suchi knew how many prisoners were sent out of Tul's line. So I would do the head count when the prisoners were being uploaded onto the vehicles. And then when we arrived at Chương Ait, I would do the head count again when they were being unloaded out of the vehicles. For example, on one occasion, perhaps 50 to 80 prisoners were being unloaded into the house at Chương Ait. I would note the numbers of the prisoners, and after the mission completed, I would then send the report to Suthi to verify the numbers of prisoners sent to Chương Ait, whether it is correct.
And once you reported the completion of the mission to Swasti, do you know whether he would create any further documentation based on your report?
I handed over the report to him. He then would verify the number of prisoners he had in hand, and he would be the one who verify the number of prisoners on the report.
And were you present when he was doing this? Would you see him check your number against some other document or no?
I was not present. After I handed over the report, I went back to my location.
Okay, so going back to the transportation to Chiang Ai, once you arrived at Chiang Ai, how were the prisoners unloaded and where were they put?
As I told you already, upon arrival, the vehicles would drive close to a house. There was a big room in that house, and the house wall was made out of wood. And the two guards would be on the vehicle, help unloading the prisoners onto the ground with the help of another two guards. And then the prisoners were brought into that big room.
And were the prisoners still blindfolded and handcuffed at the point they were brought into the room in that house?
They were handcuffed while being unloaded, and their hands were tied behind their backs while being unloaded. They were also blindfolded not to recognize the routes that they were sent along the way.
And do you recall there being an electric generator in the house where the prisoners were put?
I can recall that there was one generator using the shell, and that generator was used for the time when the prisoners were there, said the witness.
Was that generator loud? When the generator was running, was it possible to hear what was happening outside the house?
It made a loud noise while running. And that generator was located near a tomb, and I do not know where the prisoners were sent to when they were needed for execution.
So that's what I wanted to talk to you about next. How were the prisoners taken out of the house and taken to the place where they were killed, if you know?
When the prisoners were sent out of the house, each of prisoners were sent out one at a time, and there was a chair for me. I, at that location, took the name one by one, and after the names were recorded, they were sent away for execution. Prisoners would be asked to sit down, and then they were clapped behind on the back of their neck.
So you've mentioned that at this point you took their names. Did you actually write down their full name rather than just doing a head count?
I would write a sequential number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and when each prisoner was brought in, I would write down the name and the number 1, and then the number 2, 3, 4, 5. So there were names as well as the sequential numbers of the prisoners.
And who was it that was actually taking the prisoners past your chair and on to the execution site?
As I said, every one of us, prisoners were brought down from the tracks, and we all assisted them, and then they were brought into the room, and later on they were let out one by one.
ពួកពេលហ្នឹងគឺ
And Taho was also there. He was the one who organized the execution, and how each prisoner had to be walked through the pit to be killed.
As the prisoners were being moved to the pits, did they give any signs that they knew that they were about to be killed? Did they say or do anything that indicated that they knew they were about to be killed?
I did not know about that. However, we were told they had to be brought in. They were told to be relocated to the new house.
I want to ask you about something that Toi Tang said on this point. This was on the 21st of April, just before 3:36 p.m. So he was talking about the prisoners being moved from the house to the killing pits, and he said that the prisoners themselves knew that this would be the end of their lives. And then he went on to say, quote, "They were crying as well while they were sent out, and they put their palms together to implore to spare their lives, and perhaps they knew," unquote. So my question to you is, did you ever see anything like that? Did you see prisoners crying or begging for their lives?
I did not hear that. However, I heard the cry as myself. I was busy writing down the name. I heard the prisoners cried.
And when you heard them cry, did you hear them actually saying something? Was it words or was it just a cry?
it was difficult to hear the cry. As sometimes each prisoner, when they were being walked there, they actually cried and they wept after their names were written down, as they knew that they would be killed. And in fact, we told them that they would not be taken anywhere, but they were taken to a new house, and we had to lie to the prisoners as what we were told to do.
Okay, I want to turn now to the killing technique. Can you tell us how the prisoners were killed at Chiang Ai?
After the name was written down, the prisoner was walked to the rim of the pit. The prisoner was asked to kneel down. Then a metal bar was used to strike the nape of the neck, and the road was slashed as well. And for good clothes, they will be stripped down from the prisoner, but they did not have to strip off the old clothes, and the instruction to strip off clothes from prisoners were from whole. Prisoners were also disemboweled. The shackles or cuffs had to be removed, then they would be thrown into the pit.
And do you know what specifically was used to cut the prisoners' throats and to disembowel them? What kind of knife or cutting weapon was used?
At that location, there was a knife. That is a knife for cutting palm trees.
បាត់ចិត្តថ្នោតហ្នឹងគឺវាយដួលព្រោះហើយគឺ
And actually, after the prisoner was struck down, they had their throat slashed with that knife.
Was there ever any training in this killing technique? Were you ever told by anyone, or were the other guards told by anyone, this is the proper killing technique? First you hit the people with at the base of the skull with a metal bar, and then you cut their throats. Was that ever taught to you?
It was Ho and Deutsch who taught us how to kill prisoners that way, and they drew from their experience how to kill the prisoners, and they told us where to strike. So a prisoner had to be struck at the nape of the neck, then the throat had to be slashed. After that, the cuff had to be removed, new clothes had to be stripped, and then after the prisoner was disemboweled, then thrown into the pit.
And where did that instruction take place? Was this something they taught you at Chiang Ai, or had they taught you at a meeting somewhere previously?
Since we were at Du Slang, and the same instructions were relayed to us when we were at Chiang Ai.
You've mentioned Ho being present at Chiang Ai. Was he present every time that you were there, or was he only present sometimes?
The Ho was in the same vehicle as we were. As for that Deutsch, he was in a separate vehicle, that is a jeep. And the Ho came with us with those prisoners.
And just to be clear, did he come every single time you went, or did he come most of the time, sometimes, rarely?
He came every time.
And what about Deutsch? How often did he come to Chiang Mai?
As for Deutsch, he really came only the whole. Every time there was a batch of prisoners who had to be brought there, Ho would accompany them.
Do you remember how many times you saw Deutsch come to Chiang Mai?
I saw him about 3 times.
And I want to ask you now about who it was that actually carried out the killings. Was it you and the people who came with you? Was it Comrade Teng and the people who were stationed with him, or was it everyone?
The Ho who organized the forces to go, there were a group of us who were sent there, and we had to get along the fence of the execution site, and that we had to walk the prisoners to Teng's group. As for further arrangement, I did not know, as at the time I was responsible to write down the names of the prisoners who were let out to the site.
Did you ever, on any occasion, I'm not asking about the usual routine now, but did you ever on any occasion kill one or more prisoners at Chiang Mai?
Bạnពេលនោះគឺ
Duty Council, Mr. President, I seek your leave so that I can discuss this matter with the witness. Witness. I wish to decline to respond to your question.
Okay.
President Council Copper, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. I believe in this particular instance, the witness has no right to decline to answer the question. 2 reasons, as I said. First, on the matter of the content of his statement so far, there is only a gradual difference in terms of criminal responsibility in doing the actual killing and being there, organizing everything. From a criminal law point of view, he would be just as guilty if he hadn't actually do the killing. More importantly, and I come to the second reason for this particular witness, he has been convicted by a court after 1979 for his involvement in killing at Chiang Ek. That being the case, there is no risk whatsoever of, in English, double jeopardy, or in Latin, ne bis in idem. There is no danger whatsoever for him that he will be prosecuted. If that is the case, he, in this particular instance, does not have the right to decline to answer on the grounds that he might incriminate himself. So we have a very special situation here. Normally, we never object if a witness actually declines to answer on the fear of incriminating himself, but with him Hui, there is no such danger, factually and legally.
Judge Laverne, you have the floor.
Oui, Copé, vous faites référence.
Yes, Counsel Koppe, are you referring to previous conviction of this witness? Do you have any reference that you could provide us with? Could we check this? What are we talking about exactly?
I don't have the exact reference for you now, but I will get that shortly, Judge Laverne. He himself, on various occasions, but definitely in the very beginning, in the 80s, said that he was convicted to, I believe, 24 months, or at least he served 24 months of a sentence.
Counsel, do you know for what he was convicted? Do we have any way to ensure that he was convicted exactly for that?
Well, I don't have the actual judgment, if that's what you mean, but the witness himself has offered evidence that he was convicted for, if I believe correctly, the killing at Jang Ek and his general involvement in S21.
Mr. President, just briefly, this is obviously a matter for the Chamber. My only observation is that, in my understanding, the principle of double jeopardy is very precise. It doesn't attach to a sort of, cloud of facts and circumstances. It attaches to a conviction for a particular act by a particular mode of responsibility. And so, without knowing the exact terms of the conviction, it's difficult to say that there's no danger to this witness. But as I said, I understand this is a matter for the Chamber.
I actually have the reference now, Mr. President. It's E3/1918. It's a Searching for the Truth article of DC Chem. Him Hui, Deputy Chief of the Guard Unit, was imprisoned in Kandal Province for 2 years.
Does it provide any further information as to why he was imprisoned and the verdict? That's even less information than I would have expected, provided that's the only thing you have.
Well, the thing is, it was, I wanted to start asking questions to the witness as to the precise nature of the conviction for what he was convicted, but I was preempted by this particular question and the refusal to answer. So actually, I think the only way to really find out properly is ask the witness himself what he knows of that conviction to 2 years.
Witness, do you have just one question? Do you have a written version of the verdict that counsel just mentioned? A written copy of the verdict?
In 1981, police from the district arrested me, and they detained me for about 2 months or 3 months. Then I was sent to work at the rice field near the Vietnamese border, and 10 months after, the police from the district released me.
Do you remember a trial? A judge ever getting up and saying you are guilty because, for instance, you killed prisoners at S21 and writing it down in a verdict?
At that time, I was accused of being chief of a Tulsline prison, and I denied that. I said if I were chief of a Tulsline prison, I would not return to my native village. And I said that I was a victim of the center, and that I actually tried to flee away from the group.
Understand that, but was there a trial? Was there, or did you talk to police or whomever? Do you understand what a trial is? With a judge sitting and asking the questions.
At that time, there was no such thing, and later on, I was sent home.
So if I understand you correctly, you don't remember a trial and you don't have anything in writing. Is this correct?
I don't understand it.
សំណួរចេះសួរថា
President, the question is, when you were imprisoned in 1981, was there any Cambodia or people's trial before you were sent to prison? Or were you actually sent to prison by the police? And then later on, you were sent to work at the rice fields at the Cambodia-Vietnamese border? Answer. I was put in prison for about 2 months. Then I was sent to work in the rice field. And after that, they took me back for interrogation. And I was put in prison again for several months. Then I was sent to work in the rice fields again. And several months after, I was released and sent home. Question. So, does it mean that you never actually went through a trial proceeding? You were living in Khartoum province, and it means that the competent court would be the provincial Kandal court. Were you convicted by the provincial court of Kandal province? Or you were only at the level of the police headquarters in Khartoum district? President, do you understand, Mr. Witness? Did you go through a trial proceeding after your detention at the police office in Khartoum district? Answer, I did not know about that. As I said later on, I was sent home. President, I would like to inform the parties that since I am also a local judge and I worked for the Ministry of Justice since 1982, if I'm not mistaken, the court was only established after 1982, and actually it was in its full operation in 1984, though I may need to find such a document so that can be included into the case filed. That is the sub-degree for the establishment of the court, domestic court after 1979. Based on the available information at this stage, and the witness actually declined to respond to the question to avoid self-discrimination, and the chamber deems that is appropriate, as the chamber does not have the authority to compel the witness to respond to any question if the witness exercises that right of against self-incrimination. And the Deputy Co-Prosecutor, you may continue, and you probably have 2 or 3 more questions before the lunch break.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. Witness, I want to turn now to the question of the authority over S21, that is, the people above Duik and above S21. Do you know who Duik's superior was?
Previously, it was Son Sen who was Duik's superior.
And do you know for how long he remained Duik's superior? And can you tell us how you know that as well?
I did not know from when he became Duik's superior. Later on, he went to engage in the battlefields with Vietnam, and from that point onward, I did not know who was actually the direct superior of Duik. But previously, I knew, as I said, it was Son Sen.
And I just want to make sure I understand your previous answer. Was it your understanding that at the time Son Sen went to engage in the battlefields with the Vietnamese, that he ceased to be Duik's superior at that point?
Yes, he took the troops to go and fight against the Vietnamese troops.
And what makes you say that at the point that he led the troops against the Vietnamese troops, he ceased being Duik's superior?
I could say that Son Sen used to come to conduct study sessions for us, and we knew that he was Duik's superior. Later on, he took the forces to go and fight against the Vietnamese. And as I said, at one point, I stood up and raised my hand and requested to go along to the battlefield, so that if I died alone without any harm to my family members. But Son Sen at the time declined my request.
You've mentioned seeing him at S21. How many times do you recall seeing him at S21?
I saw him for one time when he came to conduct a study session for us.
Do you know when it was that you saw him there at S21?
I cannot recall it exactly. It was in 1977 when there were fightings against the Vietnamese.
Mr. President, I do have about 10 minutes more worth of questions, but I think we can do those after the break.
Thank you. It is now convenient to have our lunch break. We'll take a break now and resume at 1:30 this afternoon. Court officer, please assist the witness at the waiting room reserved for witnesses and civil parties during the lunch break, and invite him as well as the duty counsel back into the courtroom at 1:30 this afternoon. Security personnel are instructed to take Kyo Sampon to the waiting room downstairs and have him returned to attend the proceedings this afternoon before 1:30. The court is now in recess.